I like to think of myself as a open-minded person. I don't think I'm a bigot because I can change my opinions on things. And a good way to change your opinions on things, especially when it comes to history, is to go back to original texts from history, read them, and compare them to what the mainstream media or pop culture has to say today. Like, here's an example: McCarthyism. Now, I didn't live during the McCarthy era, but if you are to listen to journalists and pop culture, it seems that McCarthy was a bad man. He took things too far. He started the witch hunt for communists in the US government. And when you actually read the text, and I'm planning to make a video about McCarthy, it does seem that yes, he was wrong, because he said that a couple of people working in the US government have communist leanings and they are sided with the USSR. But now the KGB has declassified most of its documents, and we know that McCarthy was wrong. It wasn't a couple of dozen people, it was thousands of them. Thousands of people were on the payroll of the KGB working in the US government. That is some Russian interference in American politics right there. But for some reason, it seems that McCarthy does have this bad name, even though the commission that he tried to create didn't arrest anyone, didn't prosecute people and send them to prison. That never happened. So it's really interesting. Like, why do people think that McCarthy did something bad? No, he talked about something which he noticed at the time and he found concerning. It wasn't the fact that they were just communists, but it was the fact that they were operating on behalf of a hostile foreign power, the USSR, and they were trying to influence United States politics. And these people, if you look at the KGB declassified documents, weren't just into politics. They were into Hollywood, they were into the mainstream media, they were into the academia. So you had people that were pushing Soviet views into the United States, because the United States, being a democracy, was open to receiving such influences. However, because of free speech and because the American people were allowed to criticize the communists, that ideology was pushed back into the depths of hell where it belonged. And I found this really interesting article from 1947 called How to Spot a Communist. And this was during the Cold War era. And it was part of the Cold War propaganda. Now, it's interesting to point out that promoting communism wasn't illegal. You could do it. But people had the right to also criticize communism and manage to put forth their own ideas against this ideology. What's even more fascinating is that during 1947, people didn't know what actually happens in Russia because the Iron Curtain was still in effect. So the communists in the United States, they actually thought that Russia is a good thing, that the USSR is actually taking people to progressive new peaks. And only after the communism fell in the USSR do we know about the human atrocities that my parents and my grandparents have lived through. But the only thing that you can accurately point out, and a lot of people will still say that communism is good, and like the way the USSR have done things are a good thing. Like, these are a subsection, they're called the tankies, I believe. And they genuinely believe that the USSR was good. And here's my question: if it was so amazing, why weren't people allowed to live? Why weren't people who are unhappy with the way things are going in the USSR allowed to just leave towards the Western world? Because you see, in the United States, if you didn't like it, you could leave. Hell, you could even leave to Russia if you wanted. If they would let you, if the Russians would receive you, because that was the problem mostly, is that they wouldn't allow you to go in. But if they would allow you to go in, the US government had nothing against your freedom of movement to leave the nation if you do not like it there. You couldn't do that from the USSR, which is why they even created the Berlin Wall. So all these people telling me that the USSR was better, or it did good things. Yeah, it did very good things for the people in power. It did very good things for the people that were the inner party members. For them, it was an excellent system, but for everyone else, it was bad. So, now that we have a little bit of context, let's look at how to spot a communist. And you will see that 7, 8, and 9 are so contemporary. Again, this is written in 1947. And it is written by the American Magazine. Okay? It's published How to Spot a Communist. The real communist is not a liberal or a progressive. He believes in Russia first and a Soviet America. He accepts the doctrines of dictatorship as practiced in Russia, and he is prepared to use a dictator's tactics of lies and violence to realize his ambitions. Russia was into doing this in a lot of countries. Like, if you look at the history of Antifa, what is Antifa, right? Anti-fascism. It started in Germany, and you can look this on Wikipedia if you don't believe me, and look at their sources, right? I could even give you, like, literature and books to read if you want to. But again, like, I don't think, like, people are obviously going to read a 100-page book right now, and it's a lot more easy to just, check it on Wikipedia. And if you want more information, contact me. But in Germany, you had different left-leaning groups, right? Like, you had the socialists, you had the Communist Party, you had, like, all these different left-leaning groups. So they created the militant faction for these groups to bring them all together. And this was Antifa. And the leader of Antifa was taking orders from the Kremlin. The KGB was sponsoring and funding Antifa in Germany. Isn't that interesting? And what's even more interesting is that when they were against fascism, what they really were against was capitalism. Because the funny thing is, they weren't as critical of the Nazis as the time as much as they were critical of the centrists and the moderates, and they were bringing violence towards them. Very few people don't talk about this piece of history. Isn't that fascinating and interesting? Oh my God. Wow. Again, it's on Wikipedia. Like, in this day and age, not knowing things is not accepted. You literally have the computer, like you can Google things. All right. If you find a different history and an alternative thing, then feel free to correct me. But anyway, so here's some of the criticisms that. Here's some of the ways you can recognize if someone is a commie. The belief that the war waged by Great Britain and her allies during the period from August 1939 to June 1941, the period of the war before Russia was invaded, was an imperialistic war and a game of power politics. This is also very interesting because when I went to school and I studied about World War II, it was less focused on ideology and more focused on strategic resources, the power politics, and they really didn't focus that much on, like the war against Nazism. That's mostly an American propaganda. Here in Europe, it was more likely viewed as trying to reshape the borders of nations and trying to, go for resources. Like Romania had a lot of oil and Germany wanted that and Russia also wanted that. But yeah, I did hear the idea that Britain was imperialistic in the war, and it didn't fight on the side of good and righteousness. Because you see, once Poland was liberated, once France was liberated, they didn't just went out of the war like they should have. Because why did Britain join the war? They joined the war in order to protect Poland. Because they had an alliance treaty with Poland. At the moment that Germany went into Poland, right, Britain declared war. So the rewriting of history that the communists did was that Great Britain and its allies didn't go to war out of compassion, out of kindness, and for righteous reasons. The only person that went into war for righteous reasons was the Soviet people who were being invaded, and they wanted to now reconquer their own country and then spread the liberation of communism throughout Europe. That was like what was taught in Romanian schools at the time. So it's really interesting to read this piece of literature from 1947 and see that, yeah, back then, this is what the American communists would also parrot. They would say, yeah, America is imperialistic. There isn't a bigger lie that I've ever heard than the idea that America is imperialistic. Just because you have an army and you're able to project power and defend strategic resources throughout the globe and defend trade routes doesn't make you imperialistic. America would be imperialistic if it annexed Mexico and then annexed Canada and start its world of conquest, Because if you're going to say that, okay, America is imperialistic, then so is China, so is the USSR. Like, every single major superpower is going to project its military might around the world. This isn't an American thing. Literally every single nation, even India, even Saudi Arabia. Like if a nation has the military capability to project power, it will do so, unquestionably. But anyway, number two, the support of a foreign policy which agrees always with that followed by Soviet Russia and which changes as the USSR policy changes. Yeah, I mean, it's obvious that if the USSR is going to fund communist groups and communist sympathizers in the United States, as we know now because the KGB has declassified these documents, then they will have the people that are in the know, like they know they're on behalf of Russia, and they're going to pass to their NPC, to their underlings, they're going to tell them, you know, like different versions and get them to have the double thing. What's interesting is that the word NPC, the meme NPC, that exists today, I have also found that in history when reading some of the previous documents, they would call these people, the NPCs, they would be called marionette men. Like people that are like marionettes and you can control them any way you choose. And I found that to be really interesting. That was before the internet. But here's an example about supporting a foreign policy which agrees to the USSR, right? You had the hippie movement in the United States, and the hippie movement was against nuclear weapons. But they didn't ask for the USSR to denuclearize and take away its nuclear might. So what would have happened, logically and realistically, if the United States would say, all right, we're going to dismantle our nuclear arsenal. And then Russia has its own nuclear arsenal. What do you think that would happen then? Isn't that interesting? Because there weren't any hippies in the USSR. But I guess the argument was that, you know, Russia is a peaceful nation and the only reason it has nukes is because it's afraid of America. And if America would be the first one to denuclearize, then Russia would follow suit. It's very similar to, I guess, the talks on global warming nowadays. It's like, well, you know, if the United States and Europe would just tax people more and they would have like socialist issues in order to combat global warming, then China and India would also follow suit. Number three, the argument that any foreign or domestic policy which does not fit the communist plan is advanced for ulterior motives and is not in the best interest of either the people or world peace. So again, like you had the hippie movement, and any time you would have like a domestic policy that didn't really go with the communist principles, then it's a policy that is against world peace. The practice of criticizing only American, British, and Chinese policies and never criticizing Soviet policies. Wow, isn't that something you can see today regarding intersectionality, social justice, where they constantly criticize the United States, they constantly criticize Europe, they never criticize China when it comes to Hong Kong. You know, I even see an article saying that the protesters from Hong Kong are fascist. You don't see them criticizing Antifa when they're burning cars in Germany, for example. Fascinating, isn't it? Now, there are reasons for that. Nowadays, I think the cultural war is between the corporate powers and the individual people. It's not necessarily between nations like back in the day. It's more likely to do with money, with finances, with making cash, and having the correct politicians in power that will protect multinational corporations from the evils of tariffs, of borders, and all of the other things. So it's not as clear cut like back in the day, you know, like these people are supporting China. But I would have to make like another video to explain how corporations benefit from intersectionality and this woke culture. And when I say corporations, I don't mean the average Joe that has a pizza restaurant down the store. I'm talking about like multi-billion-dollar capitalist corporations which want the cheapest labor as possible, which love the European Union because they can just lobby politicians and basically pay them off in order to obtain favorable legislation, like we see it with Article 11 and Article 13, where you have big Hollywood businesses just paying off people like Alex Voss in order to get favorable legislation passed in the European Union that would ban everything that is fair use, right? Like that's what I'm talking about. These are the entities that have an interest in intersectionality. It's not about empathy or protecting people. It's mostly about making money and having useful idiots that will push your agenda, thinking that they are doing so in order to have like empathy and protect minorities and other bullshit. And if you also think about it, like think about the major corporation, right? Like the corporate employer. What is the best corporate employer? The best corporate employer is a person that's divorced, but still has to pay child support. So that when he goes home, he doesn't have a nagging wife telling him not to spend so many hours, extra hours at work. No. He spends those extra hours at work in order to pay the alimony, in order to pay the child support. He's probably very depressed, and in order to find relief from depression, he has to purchase a lot. He has to be a good consumer, and he finds happiness in buying all these things. When you are at home, you're not at home. It's not your free time. You are still a representative of the company, because whenever you say something on social media, it can reflect on your own job. And not only that, when you're at home in your free time, you shouldn't be talking with your wife or going out with your friends. You should be writing emails to your clients and trying to get more clients into doing business with your corporation. And furthermore, it's even better if you don't have any friends and the only friends that you have are from the company, so that you can go with them to different company retreats and you're more indoctrinated into the corporate culture and the corporate mindset that you want. This is why corporations love feminism, wokeism, and intersectionality and all of these things, because it creates the perfect employer. It creates the type of politics that is against borders and is more towards this bureaucracy where everything is predictable and they don't have like the uncertainty of what tomorrow can bring, and they can have cheap labor. So, you know, it's not rocket science. It's really easy to explain. And there are of course other people down the line that, like journalists who like to write clickbait shit. Like you write an article saying that white people, only white people can be anti-Semitic. Now that's going to get you a lot of views, because everybody's going to share that shit. Look what this person wrote. Look what they said. Look what they wrote. You know, and that click drives traffic. But anyway, right. Continually receiving favorable publicity in such communist publications as the Daily Worker and the New Masses. I think this is self-explanatory. Continually appearing as sponsor or co-worker of such known communist front groups as the Committee to Win the Peace, Civil Rights Congress, the National Negro Congress, and the other, which can be described as communist-inspired because they fall within the classification set forth here. So notice how all these communist groups title themselves in ways that have nothing to do with communism. Like they don't call themselves, you know, the Communists for America, the Socialist Workers for the United States or something like that. No. They know that communism is a bad word in the minds of most people. So what they do is the Committee to Win the Peace. So if you're against the Committee to Win the Peace, you're not against communism. You're against peace. You're a warmonger. You're an evil person. You want kids to die. You want babies to die in the incubators. What a horrible piece of shit you are, right? Then you have the National Negro Congress. So again, if you're against this, it's not because you're against communism. You hate black people. You're a racist. Oh my God, what a fascist, right? It's the same thing today with the environmental issues. You look at the environmental issues, it's not, even if you believe that the environment is a problem and it needs to be fixed and you don't like pollution, but if you don't like socialism, if you don't like communism, then they will say, oh, so you want the planet to die? Oh, why are you picking on a little girl? Oh, you bastard, right? It's like, oh, I care about the environment. Oh my God, I care about the environment too. Let's do something about it. Oh, let's start communism, what? You know, like that's literally the meme. So now look at the next ones and see how they can be applied today. Number 7, continually charging critics with being fascists, no matter whether the criticism comes from liberals, conservatives, reactionaries, or those who really are fascists. So everyone that criticizes communism is a fascist. Like, there cannot be any other implication. But the reason the communists would do this is because if you constantly use an insult time and time again, it sticks. And then you have groups like the ADL, like well-established groups that most of the moderates trust and believe because they had a couple of years of building that trust in the community. And then you have these groups attacking the fascists, where it's irrelevant if the person is or isn't a fascist. It's like, no, this publication called him a fascist. Like, all these publications call this guy a fascist, so therefore he must be one. arguing for a class society. This one is really important. Like, this one happens today, and it is so disgusting. Look, arguing for a class society by pitting one group against another and putting special privileges ahead of community needs. As, for example, claiming that labor has privileges but has no responsibilities in dealing with the management. So this is very similar to what you see today, right? Like, instead of the working class and the bourgeoisie, they have white people versus minorities. What's interesting is that whenever they talk about minorities, if you read the press, you're going to see that minorities are treated as infants, as children that can never do anything wrong. In fact, they even changed the definition of the word racism to only be applied when white people do it. Why did they do that? Why do they constantly change definitions? This is very important. When I was arguing against the far right, when I was talking against Richard Spencer and Andrew Anglin and all, I kept asking them, like, what do you define this? What do you define that? And they were upset, thinking that I'm being pedantic, right? But no, like, the reality is that if you have a definition, let's say misogyny, right? Well, most people in my country think, when you talk about misogyny, they think about a drunken man coming home and beating his wife, right? Like, that is horrible. Or a man that refuses to hire women just because they're women. A person that literally despises women. He can't handle them, right? This is what the overwhelming majority of people understand by misogyny. But when you change the definition, and misogyny can simply be, I don't like Star Wars because I don't like how Rey acted in that, or I don't like Rey's character, right? They will label that as misogyny. They will label that on the same level as beating someone's wife. So now, when the far left says, Bob is a misogynist, everyone that's in society, the normal people, are going to think Bob is a wife beater. You know, Bob doesn't like women. When in reality, Bob just doesn't like Star Wars. So you can see how they do this trick. And it's the same when they change the definition of racism, right? Like, if you are to say, this black person is racist because this and that, and it's a hate crime. No, it's not a hate crime, because black people can't be racist. Even though you can have like a very wealthy, powerful black person just bidding on a white homeless guy, in their mind, it's like, oh, it's all percentages. It's all like stats on a paper. And it's like, this black person is part of this class, which we consider to be less privileged than the other class. And it's irrelevant if the individual on the street. And they also like collectivize victimhood. Something that the left does is like, they will look at 3 different events and they all collectivize, oh, it's racism. So for example, out of 200 million people, or 300 million, how many are in America, you get a couple of cases where a person would call the police on a black dude for no reason, right? And it can be because the person is absolutely crazy, like I have seen some of these batshit insane ladies, or maybe the person just, you know, lives in a bad neighborhood and saw a guy trying to get into his car and they thought he's robbing it. That doesn't matter, right? But they will like not make a statistic. They will show you like 20 or 30 of these cases, and then they will conclude that they're all connected. They're all, you know, part of this white supremacy hive mind, and it's their way of sticking it to the black person. You know, it's something that they do. And every single time, right? Every single time they treat minorities as they don't have any agency. Like, I have made plenty of videos reading articles to see how the left thinks. And the reason they do this is because if minorities have no agency, then the leftist, the journalist, the academic gets to speak and gets to be the parent of minorities. So now he is empowered by the minorities, and if you disagree with him, you're actually not, you know, disagreeing with, I don't know, Jill Larson, the journalist. You're disagreeing with all the black people in the world. It is a very disgusting system, and communists used to do this even before, when they were talking about labor, right? And they were like defending the worker. And it's like, the worker were like the children that required the grown adult, the communist, to talk on behalf of them. And if you disagreed with the communist, then you are against the worker. And what's really funny about this collectivism bullshit is that if you are a worker, like you're actually part of the class, right? Like you're part of the class that you're represented, and you disagree with your representative that you didn't vote for, that you didn't elect, oh, now you are not a worker anymore. Now you are against the working class. And we see this today happening with transgender people who talk against their activists, are being ostracized from their community. Black people who want to vote for Donald Trump are being ostracized from their community. It is very disgusting. And this is why I don't like this collectivism bullshit. Like, I don't need a representative to speak on my behalf. I can talk for myself, thank you very much. Anything that doesn't have a survey, anything that doesn't have someone elected, anything that doesn't just has like a random bloke talking on behalf of me should fuck off. Okay? I can talk for myself. I'm not your little baby. Declaring that capitalism and democracy are decadent because some injustices exist under those systems. So it's very important to point out that the reason most communists and socialists and leftists hate the countries they're in, like they hate America, they hate Britain, is because they are part of revolutionary movements. A revolutionary movement asks for murdering people. This is what a revolution is. Okay? Very rarely do you have peaceful revolutions. I think there's like a couple of dozens of them in history. No, most of them are done with blood. And in order to justify having to kill your citizens, then you need to say that the entire system is evil. Because if the system has good parts, then you don't want a revolution and you just want to fix the system. So, revolutionary ideologies are always just thinking that the system is completely broken, beyond salvageable. And what they usually do is that they will only focus on the negatives, right? Like they will never talk about something positive. They erase the positives and they highlight the negatives. So, wow, I went way too long talking about this, but I think I can go through the rest of them if you guys have a little bit of patience. Apparently, they also talk that another way to recognize if someone is indeed a communist is to see if he has a communist membership card, which would be 100% proof. But this is difficult to obtain. So here are like 5 ways to point out if the person is indeed a communist or not. So the party member who openly or secretly holds a membership card. Now, I see this in the United Kingdom time and time again, especially in The Guardian. Like, from what I know, I can name at least 5 or 6 Guardian journalists that have a Labour membership card. Now, there's no problem in having a Labour membership card, but how many of them have a Tory membership card? How can you be objective as a publication, right? So if you're not, then I would automatically assume that if you're running for The Guardian, you're a left-leaning partisan person. The problem is that I also know people who worked at the BBC, and whenever they would have a problem with not understanding a news or something, the higher-ups, the editors, would just say, well, just read The Guardian and see what they think about it. I saw an interview with the guy that said that. It's really interesting, isn't it? The fellow traveler who is not a party member but who is carefully trained to follow communist policy. The sympathizer who may disagree with some policies but who is in general agreement with communist objectives. Oh yeah, I remember seeing like the anti-social justice warriors on Twitter, you know, who just constantly criticized people who are against social justice. It's like, oh, I know you're against social justice, but you're like just like them. No, I'm not a social justice warrior. I'm a centrist. I just don't like the fact that you're becoming just like them. Okay, fuck off. I don't want to become like them. I want to be worse than them. The opportunist who is unconcerned with party goals or tactics, but who believes that the party can be used to his own advantage. And the muddled liberal who, despite deep disagreement with the Communist Party's ultimate goals, cooperates with party members in front organizations. So apparently, how not to be a sucker for the left hook. I love this. Because some of these things are very, how should I say, relative to the situation that we're facing today. So the first one is to check credential before you join or help a group. Find out if it opposed Britain's imperialistic war and favored isolationism before Russia was invaded in 1941, if it supported the People's War after Russia was invaded, if it now favors the veto as used by Russia in the United Nations. So it's very interesting, right? Like you had groups which, before the people war in Russia, were like, no, we're very peaceful, we're very isolationist. And the moment you have the People's War in Russia, oh, we need to support these people. We need to donate money. It's like, well, I thought you were for world peace. What the fuck are you doing? And I thought you don't like imperialism. Why are you for Russia, which invaded Poland? How is that not imperialistic? Signing petitions Are you getting your name on a communist list? Okay, so the signing of petitions is very important because there is this group in my country called The Click. The Click is a group of very far left progressives. I think they might come from Norway, from Holland. I might be wrong. It's one of the Nordic countries, right? It has not. It's not to do with Soros. All right, not everything that's communist comes from Soros. But what they do, this is a tactic that was exposed. They will make you sign a petition, like, do you want a highway to go through your town or something like that, right? And when you sign your petition, you give away your name, you give away your social security number, the Romanian equivalent here, right? Like they will literally be on the street and they would ask you for your social security number, your name, your phone number, that type of information. And the people who would give it to them would find themselves on petitions that have nothing to do with what they signed. So a couple of years after, it's like, you find your name on a completely random alternative petition that gets for a completely different cause that you may not agree with. It's like, do you want our city to pollute less or some environmental bullshit? And it's like, hold on, I didn't sign this. I signed the other petition. So this is a tactic that a lot of people who gather signatures for petitions are using. And you should be really careful about when doing this. It was done by the communists. It's a tactic that works. Anyone can do it. It's not specific to the left. I'm pretty sure the right wing can do it as well. But this is why I usually do not sign petitions in real life, especially the ones that ask for my social security numbers. And I know Americans are mind blown by it, but here in Romania it's fine. Contributing money. Check carefully. You might be paying a communist. Kind of reminds me of the controversy between PewDiePie and the ADL, right? Like, he wanted to donate to an organization that fights against anti-Semitism, but look how quiet, how deafening the organization is regarding the situation in New York. They fail to identify the problem in New York. They fail to identify the culprit, which means either they're incompetent or they don't want to. I'm still waiting for the ADL to put their finger on why are Jews. They say it's an epidemic on attacks against Jews in New York. That is absolutely horrible. Who does it? They don't say. Why don't they say who do it? Find out who does it. Go to the police. Find out, the age, the gender, the race, the culture, the ideology, like everything you can about these people, and see if you can find the common denominator. Jesus, why is it so hard? Hire me if you can. Hire me. I'll do it for you, ADL. I'll do it for you. Put me in charge. And in a couple of weeks, I'll compile the statistics and I'll tell you exactly what is the core root behind the anti-Semitism in New York City. It is horrible, by the way, like, especially for the Jews living in New York. Can you imagine? Like, if your own institutions and your own politicians and the mainstream media turns their back on you and refuses to call the ideology which is behind the attacks? On the escalator, is your support of one group involving you in cause you didn't know about? Check all affiliations. Elevator gate. Resolutions, that's the group you support suddenly endorse other groups you know nothing about. Politics, is your non-partisan group endorsing candidates? Who are they? This is very important, actually. Like, if you have a group that, I don't know, wants to help kittens that are suffering from the cold. This is a non-political group. Like, left-leaning people, right-leaning people, Christians, atheists, Jews, every person can care about the kitten that's suffering from the cold. But if you see that your representatives all of a sudden are endorsing Hitler, you can start questioning yourself. Like, I know Hitler loves animals, but come the fuck on, the speakers. Who are the outsides invited to address your meetings? I would say even more important is, like, who are the people not allowed to speak at your meetings? It's also important. Fly-by-night issues. Does your group support policies also supported by the Communist Party, and then forget those policies as soon as the party line changes? This happened a lot in history. It's why 1984 is such a good book. Double standard. Is it sensitive about American policy in China and British policy in Palestine, but quiet about Russian policy in Iran, Poland, and Romania, as well as Bulgaria? How many left-leaning people aren't really concerned about America's imperialism in the Middle East, but are completely silent about the crimes Saudi Arabia do in Yemen? Isn't that something that you should consider, huh? The slave trade that white people have done against the blacks. How many times do they not talk about the Islamic slave trade, which was far bigger and I would say far crueler because the men were castrated to make them more docile. It's not necessarily so they can't reproduce. It's to make them more docile. Like if you have a male cat, you neuter it so it doesn't piss the carpet. If you have a bull, it's a very aggressive animal, and you castrate it so that, right? So they literally treated, like the Islamic slave trade literally treated minorities and blacks like animals. Far worse than the whites did. I'm not saying the whites treat them better. No, slavery is wrong. No one should have done it. But if you compare, right? What are the criticisms? In fact, I have seen journalists, like the same journalist that was upset and critical of America's slave policy and then writing another article saying how Islam doesn't view race. Motherfucker, have you looked at history? Like, do I care what the ideology is or do I care more how people act? Literature. Does literature handed out at meetings endorse party causes? Social lives. Are you urged to buy tickets to other groups' events? You may be contributing to their causes and membership. Watch who joins and who resigns. And apparently, Harold X recently resigned from the Independent Citizens Committee. Like, look at the names these communist groups have, right? Like, Arts and Sciences, Marion Hargrove quit the Duncan Paris post of the American Legion and the National Committee to Win the Peace. So, again, like this ideology is so cancerous that it knows it's cancerous. Like, most people don't want to follow it. So, it has to rename itself. It has to go for different things. It's like, oh, we're fighting for peace. We're fighting for the environment. We're fighting for arts and sciences. So that when you say this organization that's fighting for peace is actually promoting communism, they can accuse you of being a conspiracy theorist. They can say that you're really crazy. It's very similar to how Scientology operates. Like, if you know anything about Scientology, it also has like these groups which are for promoting business tactics, which they try to teach you how to be a good entrepreneur. And slowly, they manage to get you down the ranks in order to pay money for their whatever they call them, the seminars, right? To pay money for their seminars, and slowly they try to introduce you into Scientology. And if you were to say, well, this is about Scientology, they would say you're crazy. They would say, like, what are you doing? You're slandering us. Get out of here. So I hope you like this video. It's a little bit longer than the ones that I used to make. Not very edited, but very informative, I would like to think. And let me know what you think. I'll see you guys in the comment section. If you like my channel, please share my video. It's the only way I still manage to reach new people nowadays is through you guys, because the YouTube algorithm is more favorable towards corporations now rather than individual content creators. Apparently, Jimmy Dore, which is a left-leaning person, has most of its viewers directed to Fox News nowadays. So I guess the mainstream media won in that regard. They were losing viewers, they were losing traffic, but in order to stop the evil right-wingers on YouTube, in order to stop the false informations, now we have the YouTube algorithm directing people towards the mainstream media. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you guys in the next video.